Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast, the podcast for the people who run the country and the people who keep the country running. I'm Jonathan White, and you join us in a week where it seems the country can't decide whether a Chinese flu or a Chinese technology firm poses a greater risk to the nation. Time will tell. Remember when leaving the European Union was meant to be the scariest thing imaginable? While all this goes on, of course, the country and the economy keeps ticking along. And to prove the point, we're joined here today by Marcelo Bustamante, Managing Director of Fuse Innovation. Marcelo, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Pleasure to be speaking with you. Thank you for inviting me on the podcast.
Not at all. It's a pleasure to have you on today. And I thought we might start, Marcelo, if it's all right with you. You've had a great career in the sector, but I'd like to talk specifically about what it's like to start your own business for the first time. What are some of the skills you need, and especially when it comes to those qualities revolving around leadership?
It's a lovely question, really, because it makes me think back to the very early days of when I became a business owner. And I quite literally went one day sitting on one side of the desk where I was being led by my bosses, to the next day being involved in my own business, a small startup company that I bought into, and sitting on the other side of the desk where I became the leader. And the onus was on me to build a team and to grow the company. So I like to think that when I got involved with the company in the early days, I had some pretty strong leadership skills. But certainly I think that the journey and the knowledge of becoming a good leader, it's a never-ending journey. There's always room for improvement. There's always weaknesses that can be strengthened. So absolutely key. The role the leadership took upon me in the early days was critical to assembling the team and to helping grow the business.
Absolutely. And knowing what you know now, because it was a number of years ago now, and maybe it's a bit of an unfair question, but what advice would you give yourself then, if you could speak to that old self of yours from today?
It's a really good question. I remember in my early days of becoming a business owner and a leader, that I read this great quote, and it was, "You don't build a business, you build a team, and then you let the team build the business." And I never forgot that quote. I don't know who said it, but it's very unforgettable in my world, because building a team does require leadership. And for me, it was very important to me to get to know my team very well and establish what are their strengths, establish their weaknesses. My leadership style is very much one where I like to develop a strong degree of trust between me and the people that I'm working with. Hopefully inspire them to work with great integrity, to build confidence in them as a team, and hopefully to become a good role model, to not necessarily teach people, but have them watch how I work and to be inspired. Because I like to think that leadership skills is not something you should really impose upon people. You can't really teach people that don't want to be led, or lead people that don't want to be led. But hopefully you can inspire people to work the way that you want them to work and to become the best version of themselves. And you really do need to get to know people very well to be able to identify their strengths and have them do lots and lots and lots of what they're good at, because that makes people happy, and happy employees certainly tend to work more enthusiastically.
And I think you've really hit the nail on the head there, haven't you, Marcelo? It's so important to be able to identify the strengths and indeed weaknesses in the team around you and make sure you can bring out those strengths in the most useful way for everybody. Now, a lot of people, have drawn on inspiration from others, whether that's a personal figure or a public figure. Marcelo, was there anybody in your career that did that for you that perhaps you still today look up to for inspiration?
Yeah, I think in my very early days, as a youngster in my late teens and early 20s, it's a bit of an unorthodox one, but Arnold Schwarzenegger was a key role model of mine. And I liked everything about his journey from when he had very humble beginnings with a very, very strong vision. And he worked very hard to achieve his goals and turn his vision into reality. And that vision, as a youngster from Austria, was a strong vision that took him all the way into politics and movies. And he had the foresight to visualize where he wanted to be and then carve out a master plan to become that future person that he visualized. So he would be probably my earliest role model and leader, someone who I looked up to. And in my later years of business, very much Richard Branson and Alan Sugar, although very, very different leadership styles. I did enjoy learning about how they grew their businesses and how they became the business leaders that they are today.
Oh, without it. And, Schwarzenegger is such an interesting character. Not only, of course, people these days, perhaps apart from the films, know him as the former governor of California, but the business he's built, the worldwide business he's built, is just extraordinary. And you can tell half of the success has to do with the passion he has for it. And who's to say, if it wasn't for that little clause in the American Constitution that says you have to be born in America to be president, probably wouldn't have. That probably is the only thing that stopped him from going on from the governorship of California to running for president. But isn't passion so important in what you do on a day-to-day basis, Marcelo?
I think so, because passion and enthusiasm, it does inspire. You don't necessarily have to be an outwardly over-characteristic person. Your personality doesn't have to be larger than life, but you do need to be passionate about what you do, because that shows, it comes through as enjoyment, and then hopefully people will follow in your slipstream, because like I said earlier, being happy and people enjoying working with you and enjoying working for you and being part of a team is very important, and that does all stem down from being passionate.
Now, taking a step back from that particular theme at the minute, Marcelo, as the market currently stands, what are your thoughts about it at the minute and the prospects of it for the next 12 months ahead?
Well, I have to say the last 12 months behind us, it has affected my business. Really, it's nothing more than uncertainty, people not knowing what's going on, and the typical client base of mine, the people that buy my products and repeatedly order my products from me, not quite knowing how to spend their money, whether to hold on to it and bank it, or whether to spend their marketing budgets on products such as mine. So I have to say last year was a bit of a challenge. I'm pleased to have made it through the year. I was optimistic to make it through the year, and knowing that 2020, with Brexit and with a lot of change ahead of us, I was hoping and rooting for positive things. And I have to say, with a bit of a glint or a twinkle in my eye, I do have higher hopes for 2020 than what I did for 2019. I did always have a bit of a gloomy rain cloud outlook on 2019, so I have to say I'm pleased to have entered into a new year and a new decade with lots of political change, and I think something to look forward to. Yes, and I think,
bearing in mind, I think the uncertainty you bring up, Marcelo, is so important, but whether you voted Remain or Leave all those years ago now in that referendum, I think, well, just in the world of business, certainly people are satisfied and happy that finally we know at the very least that we will be leaving the European Union. We can plan accordingly. Marcelo, time has completely caught up with us. I'm afraid we're going to have to bring to a close there, but it's been an absolute pleasure discussing that and leadership with you. I hope very much we can sit down in the months ahead and talk again.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Real pleasure, and I do hope our paths cross again one day soon.
Thank you, Marcelo. That was Marcelo Bustamante of Fuse Innovation. Still on the theme of leadership, and if you haven't heard it before, up now is our interview with Sir Geoff Hurst. We're now joined, though, by former England footballer and still the only man to score a hat-trick in a World Cup final, Sir Geoff Hurst. Thank you very much for coming on today.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Good afternoon.
And perhaps I should start and get it over and done with. I know you must be bored with it, and you've probably been asked 1,000 times. But when you got out for a duck playing for Essex, Geoff, what was going through your head at the time?
Well, of course, that's not one of the most asked questions I get. Oh, there are one or two people who are very familiar who do Google me realise that I did score nothing for Essex. My only game for Essex first team when we played against Lancashire in Liverpool, a place called Egbert in Liverpool, many years ago, 1962, I think that was. So I didn't. I didn't really feel it at the time. It was lucky to be playing. I guess there were one or two injuries, but the problem that I had was really messing about between the two sports. That was very detrimental to me over that period of time, being stuck between the two sports.
And I think for those that don't know, there's another world that might exist where Sir Geoff Hurst was a first-class cricketer and not perhaps a footballer. But whether it's business or cricket or football, obviously the importance of leadership, it can't be understated, no matter what form that comes in. When you were at West Ham, Geoff, and when Ron Greenwood first came along, he made obviously some pretty radical changes. Was this a man that genuinely inspired confidence the first time you'd meet him?
Absolutely. I mean, he was simply a fantastic coach or teacher, if you like, of football. And the quite always mentioned when we talk about Ron Greenwood, Harry Redknapp, who was played under him and has been very successful as a player and the manager over many years. He's come across many coaches, of course, and managers during his time over years, I guess. He would still say that Ron Greenwood is the best coach he'd worked with. So you're very fortunate. I think you think you're lucky when you come across, if you have a great teacher at school and a great coach, as we had in Ron Greenwood, and of course a great manager in Sir Alf Ramsey. So to come across people like that, of that calibre, can have a huge influence on your career, of course, and then your life. And that's quite purely the case.
Absolutely. And in those early days at West Ham, with a manager like Ron there, it's also important to have confidence with your other players, and of course they become your friends. Who did you look to at the time when to inspire confidence in yourself? Was it Peters?
I think probably. Well, I was very fortunate to play with the calibre of the players I did. Again, extremely fortunate to play with the captain of England and West Ham and Martin Peters, who was a fantastic player. And as far as Martin's concerned, I think sometimes he didn't quite get the recognition he deserved and what a wonderful player he was. In terms of inspiring confidence, I always probably say that the biggest influence for me, I guess, would be the captain Bodinora. Although he was only about 8 months older than me, he graduated through the system probably 3 or 4 years earlier. He played for England in 62, 4 years before the final when I played. And so he was more, looked upon him more as a senior player, if you like, not as a guy with the same age group as me. And I looked at how he trained, how he acted, how he behaved, and how he played. And so he would say, I would also say he was a big influence on me. One thing I would say about leadership, what I do understand clearly in all walks of life, leadership is at the top, is absolutely vital for a business, a football team, in any walk of life to be successful. And it's quite evident. I was in the motor trade for a long time as well, selling car warranties to car dealerships. And you could almost tell when you walked into the business, many of the car dealerships, you could almost tell from the moment you walked in by initial reaction, people came and welcomed you, that the business was well run or conversely not well run at all. And so I understand the value and quality of leadership. And that's why I'm very fortunate to be involved in my career in those early days with two great leaders in Ron Greenwood and Alf Ramsey.
Absolutely. And since you've already brought him up, Geoff, I think it'd be remiss not to go a little bit further with that. But obviously, after at West Ham, your playing came to the attention of Sir Alf Ramsey. Now, there's a man I'm sure when you walked into a room, you knew who was in charge. When it came to managing that England team, what was his style like, Geoff?
Well, the first thing I say about Alf Ramsey, he's probably over my life the most powerful influence who had on me as a person. Naturally, it happens to an extent because he's got your whole career in his hand. Whether he picks you for England or he doesn't pick you, it can have a great impact on your career and, of course, your life. But in that era I was involved for 6 or 7 years, it was quite clear who was the boss. He was quite very, very strict. Probably at a time, maybe overly strict, but at a time you probably wouldn't necessarily get away with it in today's football because it's changed dramatically in how you deal with players then and players now. But he was the most powerful man I came across, and very few people. And he was quite ruthless in getting people out who didn't want to be part of a group, part of a team. It is important that if you've got a group of people, and that's in any walk of life, they're all singing off the same hymn sheet, and you don't have anybody that's griping or moaning about the system. And if you've got people like that in your organisation, one thing I have learned, and I've taken it on in my life, my family, you've got somebody in a group that doesn't want to be part of it, you get them out. And Alf, I think, was quite ruthless with that in his staff. And I think that's one of the most serious things I think I've learnt over a long period of time.
And is there, do you think, a specific moment, I'm sure there's probably dozens, but is there a specific moment, if you could perhaps pick right now, that did show those qualities in Sir Alf so sharply?
Yes, I think for me, certainly, I think there are instances of players who you thought would be in the team or certainly in the squad, and surprisingly they were not. There was no necessary reason for it, but looking back, I do think perhaps they were people that Alf didn't think wanted to be part of a group. So that's for me. In terms of my personal view, I think that it looked prior to the World Cup that I was going to be playing in it only a few games before. I was playing, and I played with Jimmy Greaves in a game against Yugoslavia only a couple of months before the final. And it looked at that stage as if I was going to be playing in the team. But in a couple of more friendly games before the final in Poland and Norway, I think, and Denmark, I played 2 of the 4 games, and I probably didn't quite replicate my form that I'd been showing at West Ham and in the early couple of games for England. And he left me out in the first game of the World Cup against Uruguay. He started off with Jimmy Greaves and Roger Hunt. So I had an impact of thinking at that stage I looked like I was going to play, and didn't start because of just a lack of form. I didn't play quite well enough to justify my position. And somewhat fortuitously, I only got back in the team because of a nasty gash to shin on Jimmy Greaves' leg.
And I think what you've said there, Jeff, actually does sum that up really well. And more than that, whilst it's important to have that someone in charge with those qualities, it's almost useless if there isn't a strong and unified team behind them. And there really must have been moments, if maybe there weren't, but let us know, in that 66 competition, the prolonged pressure on all of you, the weight of a nation, did it get to you?
Well, not for me personally, no. I think, and I don't, not for me, not for a second. I think I was just happy to be involved in the squad initially. Not at all. You're not aware of the magnitude of the occasion, really, looking back out. So I never really felt, people talk about pressure a lot, and it's there, and players talk about it in life. I didn't really necessarily feel any great pressure during the time I was there. And what is also important to say about Alf Ramsey, the people he left behind, that were left in the squad after he'd moved 1 or 2 players out, the squad were a bunch of very hard-nosed, professional, top-quality people. And that was, again, the leadership that Al showed. He got people in together that were very, very strong personally. And I think that was part of the success we had. We were I always describe our group as hard-nosed professionals. We have some great players, but overall they were great hard-nosed professional players. And great quality people who we've kept in contact with, over the years.
And Jeff, I've got to ask, and I'm not making this up, I've genuinely heard that people do ask you whether or not you realised there were people on the pitch at that moment, I imagine you were busy on something else.
Well, I did some theatre shows last year. They've gone fairly well, and we're going to do a series of theatre shows, in fact, starting this week, over the next 2 or 3 months. And at the end of the theatre shows, we have about 20 minutes where we allow the people in the audience to ask questions. And I won't mention both. They're too long to talk about both questions. The other one's a really stupid one. It's too long for me to tell you. It's absolutely ridiculous. But the other ridiculous question I get asked, did I realise there were people on the pitch? And of course I jokingly say, yes, I was just about to shoot to score the goal. And I looked round, put my foot on the ball and looked round for a little while and said, oh dear, there are 6 or 7 people running on the pitch. So I've been asked that once at one of the theatre shows. So I make a joke about that and saying, yes, I put my foot on the ball and waited to just have a glance round, you know.
Maybe it does prove there are things such as stupid questions, really.
Oh, yeah, there certainly are. I've got another one which I won't bore you into. It's too long to tell you. I was in a Jersey, or Channel Line, Jersey or Guernsey, 2 or 3 years ago, and most stupid, irrelevant questions, absolutely nothing to do with football whatsoever, which was absolutely, but I can use that now because it is quite funny.
Well, maybe another time then, but we...
well, you want me? I can tell you if you want. You got time? I can tell you if you want.
Jeff, go on. Go. I think it would be silly if I said no at this point.
Okay, so I was doing at a dinner in the Channel Lines, 300 or 400 people, black tie dinner, guest of honour. On this occasion, I was speaking for about 20 minutes, then allowing questions from the audience at the end of the evening. And there was usual football questions, and then all of a sudden I had somebody at the back who asked a question. I didn't quite hear what he said. He didn't have the microphone with him. So I said, I didn't hear what he said. Can you please give this chap the microphone so I can hear clearly what he said? So the chap had the mic and he said, when a turtle loses its shell, is it naked or is it homeless?
Right. What a question. What a question.
I think that would be definitely in the stupid category, wouldn't it? So we had a laugh about that.
And you've got to have a patient of a saint, I think, sometimes to put up with things like that.
I found it amusing. I just found it amusing. In fact, some of the audience found it highly amusing as well. So it did make me laugh that day.
If you can put up with my questions, you can probably put up with anything. But there would have become a point, though, Jeff, I think you were a young man when obviously this happened, when you must have realised that teammates, began looking at you for leadership. Is that something that occurred to you, or did you just realise that by one way or the other, people actually begin to look up for you for inspiration?
Well, possibly. That's never really struck me until you've actually mentioned it now, quite frankly. It's a new question. Does anybody look up to me? I'm sure perhaps there are people who pay you compliments of fans of West Ham and Stoke, and of course England fans who I think probably it would be very immodest of me to suggest that I felt that somebody was looking to me for inspiration.
You don't have to, but I will.
It's okay for a third party to do it. Perhaps that may have been the case over the years. People look at you and maybe it has a helpful effect. But I do think you how you behave and set examples on and off the pitch, people must realise that has an influence. How you react and behave to situations on and off the field surely probably has an impact to younger players coming into the team latterly. Yeah.
And with that, looking at football today, is there anybody that you think particularly on the field or the sidelines that strikes you as someone with those qualities that you could identify in a natural leader?
Well, current players, you mean? Oh,
players, managers, anybody that you look to today, really?
Well, I think some of the outstanding. I think the best example about a leader at the moment is Klopp at Liverpool. He has been absolutely fantastic to acquire the players and get them to. Their attitude is absolutely fantastic. They're great players, but there's more than just being good players in football. It is have a good player with a fantastic attitude, and their willingness to work for each other and the team is absolutely outstanding. Hence these unbelievable results. There are, and the great players not always succeed as individuals, or probably even certainly as a team if you haven't got the right attitude alongside it. And they're probably, and that comes through the leadership. That's not just luck.
Absolutely.
That's absolute leadership. He'd be the best example, of course, in football terms today. Easily. And of course, but going back not that long ago, Alex Ferguson, who's just absolutely, you've got to take him as the first example, because Klopp's only done this over a period of time, a short period of time. But if you look at the 26, 27 years that Alex Ferguson did with Manchester United, and subsequently since he's gone, how they are not doing so well. He's the best example of management we've probably ever seen, and I don't think anybody will see the like of that kind of leadership again. It's absolutely astonishing.
And do you think, could you imagine Sir Alf or even Ron Greenwood managing teams today?
Yes, I think so. I think yes, no question at all. I think Ron Greenwood. Yeah, well, the answer, straightforward answer is yes.
That's a good answer.
The straightforward answer is yes. I can elaborate as much as you want, but the straight answer is absolutely categorically yes.
And with and I know if we could talk about this probably for the next hour or so, but I'm conscious of the time. Looking back through your playing career, perhaps especially your time for England, who was it that struck you more than anyone else on the pitch that displayed qualities of not just leadership but companionship and level-headedness that you think that have stuck with you all these years later?
Well, I think I was very fortunate, and I wouldn't pick any one player out. I think looking at that,
so many,
and that's why we were successful, because we had so many showing all those qualities that you just mentioned throughout the team. I think that was outstanding, and it's an opportunity to talk about all of them in that breath. And there was nobody, and going back from an earlier question for me, all hard-nosed professionals, good teammates, good socially, and that's why we kept in touch with each other on our golf days every year up until about 5 years ago. Of course, with the sadly dwindling numbers, we still got on. Our wives got on all together all those years later. It didn't just finish after '66. That reunion, that camaraderie, that team spirit. Getting on with each other lasted for a long time, and I wouldn't. When you put those questions and how you categorise those, I would pick every one of the 11 players who you put in that category that were like that. There was nobody else; they were all outstanding, and I think that was a big part. I can't stress how big a part that was, and I've said that many times for the success of the team. We had some great players. We had some great players, of course. But without the attitude alongside that, going back to an earlier question, we wouldn't have been as ultimately as successful.
Exactly. Without that, the whole will never be greater than the sum of its parts. But with it,
yes, the word is team. The word is team.
Absolutely.
And I always use the word team when I talk. Sometimes together, everyone achieves more, and that's the same in any walk of life. That's fundamental.
And lastly, Jeff, looking, if you were to give advice, and whether this is in sport or business or indeed any other walk of life, what would you identify, if you can, as the key tenet that you can't go without in terms of leading a team, no matter what that team is?
Single-mindedness, dedication, dedication to the job, thinking about that role, that job in leadership all the time. It's a huge part of your life. I don't think you can switch off when you're in business at the top level or sport at the top level. You may, have a couple of weeks holiday, but I'm even sure if these top managers and leaders in all walks of life are away on holiday on a beach somewhere warm, I'm sure they will not switch off for 2 weeks and completely not think about their role as the boss of an organisation. And I think you're completely focused. You're always thinking about things, thinking about improvements, and it's just dedication and tuning your life to being successful.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, on that point, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Nice to have a talk about this and just go over the past and just refresh my own memory about the quality of the players I grew up with.
Excellent. Another time, it would be great to talk again.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
This has been the Leaders Council podcast. Thank you for celebrating excellence in leadership with us. I've been your host, Jonathan White. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast. The views expressed within the podcast do not reflect the views of the Leaders Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, its parent company or subsidiaries, members of staff, other guests, or any other person therein associated.